Mr. Šmic, thank you for talking to us. Thank you for giving an interview for Newsmax Balkans. Welcome to Republika Srpska, and hope you're having a good time and you're enjoying your stay so far.
Can I say hvala?
Yes, you can say hvala.
It's an honor to be with Newsmax. I've been working with Newsmax for over 10 years.
You are among a small number of prominent Americans attending the commemoration of the Day of the Republic, an event that has for years been the subject of negative media portrayal in Bosnia and Herzegovina, the European Union and the United States so far. The observance of January 9th has been disputed by the Constitutional Court of Bosnia and Herzegovina, as probably you already know, a body widely viewed as heavily influenced by the Office of the High Representative, in part because the date coincides with the Orthodox feast of the St. Stephen, which is an Orthodox celebration only. From a constitutional perspective, can historical identity or public commemoration be regulated or invalidated by judicial or administrative decree? Can institutional decision, so to say, influence the will of people and their wish to celebrate the day that the Republika Srpska was founded?
You know, that's an interesting question because St. Stephen, by the way, St. Stephen Protomartyr is not just a saint of the Orthodox Church. We Roman Catholics also honor St. Stephen.
On the other date?
Yeah, we don't celebrate it on the same date as our 4th of July. That's the difference. So I think if you talk about, at least from the perspective of a constitutional expert in America, which I am, it would be very illegal for a government official to tell people that they cannot celebrate a Christian holiday. Because the Christian holiday falls on the Day of Independence, is that what it's called?
Yes. It's a Republic's Day.
Yeah, Republic's Day. That shouldn't affect the constitutional analysis. For an American, I feel very offended that a government official would tell anybody that they cannot celebrate a Christian holiday.
And it's not only a Christian holiday, it's not an Orthodox holiday, it's the day that Republika Srpska was founded.
Yes, but my understanding is that the objection to the celebration is mostly because it falls on the Christian holiday. I think also from a constitutional standpoint, it would be a violation of our First Amendment to tell citizens that they can't celebrate even a non-religious holiday. Independence Day for us is very, very important. I presume it's the same for Serbians.
Of course. As an American citizen, how would you personally respond if an international body attempted to prohibit the observance of July 4th in the United States, the Independence Day? How would you feel if some judicial authority would say, yeah, well, that's 4th of July, no, that's not legal anymore?
Yeah, I would be severely offended. I would be shocked, frankly, because it's unheard of in America. The very idea of a government official saying you can't celebrate the 4th of July, it's not only unconstitutional, it's un-American. It goes to the core of who we are.
There is an ongoing debate in the United States regarding the use of the auto pen for signing executive orders and other presidential actions. From the standpoint of constitutional accountability, how problematic is it when sanctions are imposed without a clear, direct exercise of responsibility by the elected president?
It's very constitutionally problematic. For anybody, for any person other than the President of the United States to exercise presidential authority is so problematic. I have said publicly it makes the actions of whoever authorized the auto pen void ab initio, which means It's a Latin term, void ab initio.
Oh, yes. Sorry.
It was never valid. So you can, if you have an auto pen sanction or an auto pen pardon or an auto pen law that was signed by somebody other than the President of the United States, then it's as if it never existed. It's not only illegal, it's a nullity, a constitutional nullity. Now, I have to clarify, auto pen can be used properly, but there has to be clear evidence that the person who has the authority to make the decision actually approved the use of his or her auto pen. And in the case of President Biden, almost all of that evidence is lacking. So the normal presumption of government regularity has already been rebutted by a massive amount of evidence produced by my organization, the Oversight Project. And that has been ratified by congressional hearings. So any presumption of government irregularity has been already removed. So as far as I'm concerned, all of those auto-penned actions, without clear evidence that the president authorized them, they are nullities.
If sanctions are formal issues in the name of the president, while decisions are made by unelected actors in the executive branch, does this constitute a practical example of what is often described as a deep state?
I think it very much does. I mean, deep state is not a constitutional term, but my understanding of when people say deep state, it is in fact the exercise of government authority by people who do not have the authority to exercise it. I mean, that's my understanding of deep state, and the more we can shed light on how that happens, the better it is for the American people. Because frankly, whenever the American people see government action happening without clear authority, we think of our own Declaration of Independence, where literally in July 4, 1776, our forefathers described a king who was sending forth hither swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. And that's what we see today in deep state activities. We see people who have no accountability spending our money to harass us.
Yes, but when you say deep state, most people think about a conspiracy theory, but it's not.
It's not a conspiracy theory. I served for almost 4 years as the Inspector General of the U.S. Department of Defense. I face the deep state every day. It happens. It is nothing conspiratorial. It's factual.
Does the sanction of elected officials based on their constitutional interpretations amount to interference with the democratic will of people?
I think it does. I think when the people elect their government representatives or their executive, when they exercise that fundamental right, and when a government official comes in and removes that elected official from office, that is a fundamental deprivation of the rights of the people.
How would an American person understand and receive information that an American official was removed from his or her office by the will of a foreign politician, diplomat, foreign person, whoever it was?
I think the American people would see it as an act of war.
Act of war?
Yeah. For a foreigner to come in and deprive the American people of their fundamental right to have their representatives exercise government authority, that would be perceived as an act of war.
Based on your experience, to what extent is the United States policy towards the Balkans still shaped by outdated assumptions rather than the current political and institutional realities on the ground? Is it still there, like the the residues of the past administrations, are they still there on the field?
I think they are still there both in our government and among our people. I think it's very important that the American people understand the facts of what's actually happening in the Balkans. Most Americans, unless they've actually served in the Balkans during the war, or unless they've been in government diplomacy or in business here in the Balkans, most Americans are not knowledgeable of the actual facts.
How long does it take when a new administration with a new energy and with new ideas, and in the end and in the beginning with different values than the previous administration? How long does it take to to change the way things are happening, the way that the government is functioning throughout the whole system of the administration? How long does it take to be sure that every ambassador, every government official actually acts in a way of a different values, of new politics?
Your question, I question the underlying assumption of your question. You're suggesting that it can be achieved. My answer is, it is a constant battle, and I have personally fought that battle. I remember when I was first confirmed by the U.S. Senate and came in as the DoD Inspector General, my acting deputy had a meeting and everybody looked very sad, and I pulled the deputy aside. I said, "Why are the faces so sad?" He said, "Sir, we've seen Senate-confirmed inspectors general come and go. These people will survive you. These people will be here long after you go." But in my case, they were wrong. By the time I left, most of those people in that first room had either been fired or resigned on their own.
So it's possible.
Yes, it requires strong leadership, though.
But it's a constant battle.
It's a constant battle, and anybody who engages in that battle is going to be attacked.
Do you think that President Trump is determined to win this battle?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so refreshing to have a president that faces the enemy, the domestic enemy that we have, which is unelected bureaucrats exercising authority that they have no business doing. And it's refreshing to have a president that acknowledges that and takes it on.
Having now observed the Republika Srpska firsthand, you've been here a couple of days and you are following everything that is happening here. How do your impressions, political, institutional, and leadership related, compare with how Srpska is typically characterized in Washington policy and media circles in past couple of years, let's say decades so far?
You know, the most impressive thing that I've experienced in the last few days is the strong, courageous leadership of Serbians here. For instance, on Christmas Eve, the former president, President Dodik, tweeted out a picture of him at a Christmas Eve service and focused not so much on him, but on being the Christmas Eve and the fact that we are celebrating the birth of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. And just doing that was for me as an American, such an act of courage for a leader to do that. Most American politicians are afraid to mention the name Jesus Christ. It's just ironic because we were founded as a Christian nation, and today it's almost as if you can't say the name Jesus Christ. And to see a president here in Srpska just, a matter of fact, acknowledge and spread the good news of the birth of Jesus Christ on Christmas Eve, it's just inspiring.
You're not acting as a lobbyist, but as an independent figure with extensive experience at the U.S. Department of Defense and the Office of Foreign Assets Control. And you now lead, you are part of the oversight project. Did anything you saw or heard here materially challenge the prevailing political or media narrative about the Republika of Srpska in the United States? How different we are now that you are here than what you heard in the media in the United States?
Yeah, well, of course, there were sanctions imposed, and whenever sanctions are imposed on a foreign government by the U.S. government, the American people assume that there is some foundation for that. There must be something terribly wrong. These people must be evil. But I've experienced exactly the opposite here. I mean, not only have I met a number of just great people and government leaders and private citizens, but there's the sense of friendship to America that you typically don't see in foreign governments, especially in other parts of Europe these days. I mean, when I came over, I came through Germany and visited with a friend in Germany, and there is still a kind of a sense of fearing President Trump as if somehow he's an evil dictator. And I have to explain to my friends in Germany, I said, Donald Trump is like the opposite of an Adolf Hitler. He's a good man, he's an experienced, successful businessman, he loves our country and he loves God, and he's trying to be a good president for all the American people.
How long does it take, how long do you think that in this case would it take to, for American people to understand, to see a different picture about Serbs and the Republika Srpska now that the sanctions were lifted? Because the challenge is when you say to American people, oh, well, the United States imposed sanctions on Republika Srpska, and American people say, yes, but there's something wrong with those people when they have sanctions. And when you lift sanctions, how long do you think it's going to take for American people to start to understand, well, those people are not that wrong. They're not, there's nothing bad about that.
It depends upon people and entities like the Oversight Project being able to shed light on facts. I think the American people, once they see facts, not propaganda, not spinning by globalists or people that are basically fighting against our own government as well as our friends overseas, once they see the facts, I think the American people are very smart and they'll pick up on it very quickly. But the issue is, the challenge is shedding light on those facts.
You met here with officials who argue that their actions are intended to defend rather to undermine the Dayton Peace Agreement. Did those arguments strike you as radical or as legally grounded within the Dayton structure?
Yeah, my understanding of Dayton, and I wasn't personally involved, but my understanding is that it's fundamentally built upon the principle of self-determination and subsidiarity, where the Serbs here in Srpska should be able to determine how their lives are governed. And my understanding is that there have been powers that have been taken away from the Serbian people in Srpska so that they can't manage their own affairs. They can't elect their own officials. That seems fundamentally contrary to Dayton. It seems to me that anybody who suggests somehow that the modern or recent governments in Srpska are contrary to Dayton, I think it's the opposite. I think the bureaucrats that are challenging that are the ones that have it wrong.
The Dayton Peace Agreement is an international treaty and the constitutional foundation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. If constitutional arrangements are altered without the consent of all who signed this agreement, meaning all people, both entities and three peoples, constitutional peoples, does that still constitute as the rule of law, or something fundamentally different than that?
The treaties are very much like contracts. It's just the parties to the treaties are governments or states as opposed to individuals. When you have a contract and when one party changes the fundamental terms of the contract without the party's consent, that's called a breach.
Yes, and it usually means the end of the contract.
That usually means termination of the contract.
The leadership of the Republika Srpska maintains that Dayton has been undermined through imposed decisions rather than formal constitution amendment procedures, meaning decisions of the Office of the High Representative, especially. From a legal standpoint, would you characterize this as constitutional evolution or constitutional erosion?
I would say constitutional erosion. I think it goes back to what I said. Even though Dayton was an international treaty, there were certain principles that underlie the agreement between and among the various international parties. And when those principles are undermined, the very foundation of the agreement is undermined.
Would such a process ever be tolerated within the United States if applied to a U.S. Constitution? If you would change the U.S. Constitution, which is very hardly changeable, would it be ever accepted in the United States to have this kind of actions towards the Constitution?
Yeah, the unfortunate answer to your question is that we have had many recent instances where our Constitution has been changed, but not through the amendment process. And it typically has been done by the U.S. Supreme Court, interpreting the Constitution. The most obvious example is the 1972 decision in Roe versus Wade, which created a constitutional right to abortion. And that was recently reversed by the U.S. Supreme Court in a very sound decision. But it took decades, and during that time, the American people experienced and protested regularly this usurpation of the constitutional amendment process by a branch of the U.S. government that was essentially abusing its power. And finally, that decision was reversed after decades. And now we have much more liberty in the United States. Each state is allowed to do what our Constitution originally empowered each state to do.
So, meaning it's possible. It's possible to reverse something that such a important and high judicially high institution decides upon the Constitution. It's possible to reverse.
Yes, when an entity usurps a power that it doesn't have, it can be reversed, and we just saw it reversed in the United States.
The Office of the High Representative is an unelected institution, as you probably know, with authority to impose laws and remove elected officials. That's something that is happening on the field. From the perspective of American constitutional theory, how sustainable or defensible is such a governance model where you have one person who exploits all the powers that he, in this case, obviously doesn't have?
Yeah. My understanding, and I need to do some more research, but my understanding is that some of these powers are not from Dayton. They're the so-called bond powers.
None of them are not from Dayton.
Yeah.
Yes.
if the powers were being exercised pursuant to a legitimate treaty, that's the treaty. And if the parties agreed to it, it is. If powers are being exercised without a clear answer to by what authority and for what purpose, those are the type of abuses of power that I used to investigate as the DoD Inspector General. And if there's no clear answer to by what authority a government official is exercising a power, then we hold those government officials accountable. We shed light on what they're doing and we hold them accountable.
This question will probably be very weird from this perspective, but it has to be asked, it has to be mentioned. Is there any institution or office in the United States that exercises comparable powers without meaningful judicial review or foreign or authority, as it is what we mentioned in Bosnia?
Yeah, well, there have been instances where government officials are exercising authority that they're not empowered to exercise. And unfortunately, inspectors general have been accused of exercising such authorities, and it happens. And those inspectors general need to be held accountable just like any other official usurping powers that they don't have the right to exercise. They need to be held accountable. And it's a constant challenge. That's why we need in America nonprofits like my organization, the Oversight Project, to continuously shed light on what's happening in our government with our money. And my understanding is that this representative that's exercising power in Srpska is being paid in part by my tax dollars.
It certainly has been, yes. How do you believe the American public would react if a governor or mayor elected through democratic elections were removed by an external or foreign authority? We already talked about this.
Yeah, I would say Americans, an act of war. I'm sorry.
Officials of the Republic of Srpska argue that sanctions imposed by the previous U.S. administration functioned as political punishment rather than as narrowly tailored legal measures. In your experience, how often do sanctions drift from the realm of law into the realm of political correction?
Yeah, you know, I haven't seen that happen too often. Obviously, the sanctions in the United States system, they can be imposed either by the executive, by the president, or they can be imposed through legislation. There's sort of shared power there. But the idea of just using sanctions for just raw political retribution, that seems pretty lawless to my constitutional mind.
In your view, is long-term stability in Bosnia and Herzegovina achievable through continued external supervision, or only through consistent adherence to the Dayton Agreement and the expressed democratic will of the constituent peoples?
Yeah, I think there's a special situation here. I think, you know, we had a war, the United States participated, NATO participated, and then it resulted in a treaty that resolved the war. But it's been decades. Things change. I think from my constitutional perspective, I think when things change and people start thinking that Dayton needs to be amended, then I think the parties need to amend Dayton. They shouldn't be amending it through administrative or bureaucratic fiat. That's lawless, in my mind, as a constitutional expert.
So it can only go back to where it began, yes. Reset the process and have peoples decide.
Yeah, the parties who formed the Dayton Agreement need to readdress it if it needs to be changed, and maybe at some point you can imagine at some point it needs to be terminated by the parties. It's like, okay, we don't need this framework anymore. There's a new world, there are new challenges, and it should be amended, but not by an unelected government official.
Mr. Šmic, thank you so much for talking to Newsmax Balkans.
It's my pleasure.